Your relationship with money was programmed before you ever earned a dollar, before your first paycheck, before your first purchase, before you understood what a mortgage was or what interest meant or why your mother's voice changed when the bills arrived. By the time you were old enough to earn, spend, save, or owe, the operating system was already installed. How money feels, what money means, whether money is something you pursue openly or mention quietly, whether having it makes you safe or having too much makes you suspect, whether asking for more is ambition or greed, whether debt is failure or just reality. You didn't choose any of this. It was absorbed from the kitchen table, from the neighborhood, from the conversations that stopped when you walked into the room, from the things that were never said but always present. And it's still running your life right now and every financial decision you make, including the ones you think are rational. 594 Driggs Avenue, pre-gentrified Williamsburg, Brooklyn. The notion of receiving care from my pain was as foreign as seeing a sports car pass by my apartment. That sentence tells you everything about the financial environment I grew up in. Healthcare and luxury existed in the same category, things that happened to other people. Poverty under the plague of addiction. My father's absence wasn't just relational, it was financial. When the person who's supposed to contribute to the household chooses a dream over the family, the economics of the household shift. My mother carried that weight. The details of how she carried it weren't explained to me as a child. They didn't need to be. Children absorb financial stress through walls, through the sound of a phone ringing and nobody answering, through the meals that repeat 3 nights in a row or not at all, through the coat that doesn't get replaced when it should. The programming that installed, money is scarce, money is stressful, money is something you survive, not something you manage. Money is the thing that's never quite enough, and the gap between what you have and what you need is a permanent feature of your life, not a temporary condition. Nobody sat me down and taught me this. Nobody needed to. Financial programming doesn't require curriculum. It requires environment. The environment taught. By the time I started working at the New York Public Library at 14, earning my own money for the first time, the operating system was already running. Money meant survival. Earning meant relief. Spending meant risk. Saving meant hoping the gap between need and have would shrink enough that the phone could ring without your stomach tightening. I was 14. The programming was already a decade old. Here's what poverty's financial programming does that almost nobody talks about. It follows you up the economic ladder. You get promoted, you earn more, you change jobs, change industries, change tax brackets. The number on the paycheck changes. The programming doesn't. You've heard the career trajectory across this series. Library page at 14, insurance, nonprofits, 6 years in luxury hospitality, general management, commercial real estate, operations management across Manhattan luxury properties. Titles changed, salaries increased, responsibilities expanded. The stomach tightening when the phone rang about money, still there. The impulse to spend what you have before it disappears, because in the environment where the programming was written, money did disappear, still running. The discomfort with financial planning, because planning assumes a future you were never taught to trust, still operational. The scarcity mindset doesn't care about your paycheck. It was installed in a context where survival was the horizon, and it continues projecting survival as the horizon regardless of what your bank account says. I've watched people earning 6 figures making the same financial decisions they made when they earned minimum wage. Not because they're irresponsible, because the operating system running their financial behavior was written at minimum wage. The income upgraded, the code didn't. Across my professional life, I repeatedly encountered systems that operated outside the lines. People in positions of power who extracted from the people beneath them. Compensation promised but reduced by the time it reached me. Structures designed to benefit those at the top while those doing the work absorbed the cost. I can't name names or organizations, not because it isn't true, but because the system, the legal system, protects people with boundless resources, and I'm not one of them. The same system that allowed the exploitation protects the exploiters from accountability. What I can tell you, there was a period in my early career when I took on 1099 work. No taxes withheld, paychecks that arrived months apart if they arrived at all, and there were arrangements I agreed to without fully understanding what I was agreeing to. Money that moved through hands before it reached mine. By the time I understood the full picture, what I owed the IRS, what had been taken in ways I hadn't anticipated, what I'd already spent surviving on credit cards while waiting for checks that came late or reduced, my credit was destroyed. Fines, penalties, interest compounding on interest. And it wasn't just intentional extraction. Sometimes the system fails you through pure incompetence. I got rear-ended while working at planned companies. Needed shoulder surgery. It was supposed to be covered under the at-fault driver's no-fault insurance. The hospital billed me directly instead of the opposing party's insurance company. Sent to collections while spending months trying to get it corrected. Eventually, got it resolved, but the damage to my credit was already done. The scarcity programming from 594 Driggs Avenue told me money was hard to come by. What I learned in the professional world was something worse. Sometimes the money you earn gets taken, legally, illegally, through arrangements you can't fully see until you're inside them, by people in positions you're supposed to trust. The scarcity code was confirmed again and again, and the financial restrictions from those years, the credit destruction, the IRS debt, the years of recovery, compounded the original programming to create a financial operating system that expected exploitation. That expectation isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. The pattern repeated across enough environments that it became part of the code. Liz and I bought a house in Ozone Park, Queens. Timing could not have been worse. We purchased just around the time the real estate bubble collapsed. She was pregnant with what would turn out to be our first miscarriage. The market crashed a few months later, and we found ourselves underwater, owing more than the house was worth, with both a mortgage and a construction loan on a property that needed more work than we'd anticipated. For 9 years, we lived inside that financial compression. Along that journey, while I was trying to build a real estate career, Liz left her hotel management position to open a family daycare in the house, to be closer to our daughter, to reduce childcare costs. The trade-off? A 75% income reduction. We went from 2 professional salaries to 1, then to only the daycare income with our small remaining savings as a buffer. The math didn't work on paper. We did it anyway. Because the calculation wasn't purely financial, it was cross-pillar. Relational proximity to our daughter weighed more than the income gap. Our children slept on mattresses on the floor, not as some minimalist lifestyle choice, because furniture was a luxury we couldn't afford. Executive positions on the resumes, kids sleeping on mattresses on the floor. End of the month, sometimes we couldn't buy groceries. Professional titles and food insecurity existing in the same household. That's what financial restriction looks like when people don't talk about it honestly. It doesn't respect your business card. The scarcity programming at 594 Driggs Avenue had a field day during Ozone Park. Every childhood lesson about money being scarce, money being stressful, money being the thing that's never enough, the house confirmed all of it. The code wasn't just running, it was validated, except something else was also happening during those 9 years. something the scarcity code couldn't explain. Even during the worst of Ozone Park, mattresses on the floor, end of month grocery anxiety, construction loan and mortgage both pulling at a household with 75% less income, I kept investing in growth, classes, education, personal development, and anything that built capacity, even when the money for it came from budget that couldn't sustain it. The scarcity code said, you can't afford this. Stop spending on things that don't produce immediate income. Survival first, growth later. Later meaning never, because in a scarcity operating system, the crisis is permanent and later never arrives. I overrode the code, not through willpower or positive thinking, through a pattern I've been practicing since the library at 14. Invest in capacity even when the numbers say you shouldn't. The library didn't pay well. I took every training opportunity it offered. Guardian Life didn't pay well, but it paid for my apartment in Spanish Harlem. I studied how institutional knowledge moved. Every job that didn't pay enough taught me something I couldn't have learned at a job that paid more. This pattern, prioritizing growth during scarcity, contradicts every financial rule the scarcity code installs. The code says, protect what you have. The pattern says, build what you need. The code is defensive. The pattern is generative, both operating simultaneously, and the tension between them defined my financial life for 20 years. The massage therapy license, the certifications, the specializations, the acting training, the spoken word, none of these look like smart financial decisions when I was making them. They look like a man who couldn't afford groceries, spending money on things that didn't produce revenue. Every single one of them is in the methodology I teach now. The investments that looked irrational under the scarcity code turn out to be the foundation of everything I've built since. The scarcity code couldn't see it, because scarcity code only measures what's in the account right now. It has no framework for compound investment in capacity. The turning point was counterintuitive. We downsized, sold the Ozone Park house, moved the family, 2 adults, 2 children, into a 1-bedroom apartment nearby. That's not a typo. 1 bedroom, 4 people. Every financial narrative in American culture says bigger is better. Upsize, upgrade. The house is the symbol of success. Downsizing is failure. Downsizing is going backward. We went backward on purpose. Applied the 80-20 principle to our possessions. Kept the 20% that produced 80% of our value and joy. Let the rest go. The physical reduction, less space, fewer things, lower overhead, created something the bigger house never could: financial margin. Margin. That's the word the scarcity code doesn't have. Scarcity code tracks income and expenses. It measures the gap between have and need. It doesn't account for margin, the space between what you earn and what you must spend, the space where choice lives. The 1-bedroom apartment had lower rent than the underwater mortgage. Fewer possessions meant fewer costs. And in that margin, in that deliberately created space, something became possible that Ozone Park never would have allowed. I had room to step away from operations management and pursue acting training, a professional shift that would have been financially impossible inside the old overhead. Liz had room to return to hospitality leadership when the timing was right, eventually becoming director of rooms at a Southern California resort managing 600 guest rooms and multi-million-dollar budgets. The financial margin created by a smaller life supported a cross-country relocation to California, from mattresses on the floor in Ozone Park to 5 acres at 780 feet above sea level in California. The path between those 2 points ran through a 1-bedroom apartment, through deliberate financial restriction. through the decision to create less in one dimension so more could emerge across all the others. But some people are just bad with money. Most people diagnosed as bad with money are running financial code installed in environments where those behaviors were rational. Spending everything immediately is rational if the environment taught you that money disappears. Avoiding financial planning is rational if the environment taught you that the future is unpredictable. The behaviors persist because the code persists. Calling it bad with money blames the person while ignoring the programming. But financial literacy is the answer. Financial literacy teaches mechanics, budgeting, compound interest, debt management. Necessary, not sufficient. You can know exactly how compound interest works and still make decisions driven by scarcity code. The person who understands investing intellectually but can't bring themselves to invest because the programming says, don't let go of money, doesn't have a knowledge problem. They have a code problem. Literacy addresses the first. The financial pillar addresses the second. But some financial restrictions are real. Systemic racism, wage gaps, generational poverty. Absolutely. When I was working my first job at the New Amsterdam branch library, we were donating books to a workforce library on Wall Street. I was waiting in the lobby with a dolly full of books, in awe of the interior. I'd never seen inside of a Class A building. The security guard said something to me. I didn't hear him, so he clarified. Hey, Spick, you don't know how to read? The elevator to 20 is on the other side of the hallway. I was ashamed, enraged. I didn't know what to say. The librarian with me stood up for me with a tenacity I'll never forget. 30 years later, those words still ring in my ear. That incident fueled one of my first poems at the Nuyorican. I called it The Spick. The last line, if I'm a spick, then that's my angelic name. Restriction into catalyst. Even then, systemic barriers aren't theory to me. They're biography. I changed my name from Torres to St. James at 19 because doors opened differently depending on which name was on the resume. I watched my stepdaughter get bullied for her hair, her skin, her Jordans in a California school. I worked at a commercial brokerage where my supervisor sabotaged my largest lead. And then there are the laws designed to protect people by excluding them from wealth. The SEC's accredited investor rule, Rule 501 of Regulation D, requires that to invest in most private real estate projects, you must have a net worth over $1 million or annual income over $200,000. These thresholds haven't been adjusted since 1982. Think about what that means for a neighborhood like the one I grew up in. A community could organize, pool resources, $50 here, $100 there, invest collectively in restoring a building on their own block, create ownership, build equity, generate wealth that stays in the neighborhood. They can invest, technically, if they can afford the securities attorneys, the private placement memoranda, the audited financials, and the SEC filings. The entry fee to play by the rules costs more than impoverished communities have to invest. The law says they're not wealthy enough to be trusted with their own money. Meanwhile, anyone can buy lottery tickets. Anyone can download a sports betting app and gamble their paycheck. Anyone can invest in public stocks that collapse overnight. But pooling $50 with your neighbors to invest in your own block, that requires $1 million net worth. 90% of the world's millionaires built their wealth through real estate, and 90% of American households are legally blocked from the investment vehicles that make that possible. That's not protection. That's exclusion dressed as paternalism. This episode does not argue that financial restriction is purely psychological. Systemic barriers are real, measurable, documented. What this episode does argue, on top of those structural realities, there is also a layer of financial code installed by environment, reinforced by experience, that operates independently. Addressing the code doesn't replace the need for structural change, but structural change alone doesn't address the code. Both are real. Both require engagement. But downsizing only works if you have options. The principle isn't downsize. The principle is create margin through deliberate restriction in one dimension to generate movement in others. For us, that meant physical space. For someone else, it might mean time, cutting a commitment to create margin for something with higher return. Or social proof, stopping the financial performance of success to redirect that money toward actual capacity. The specific application varies. The principle holds. But some people are just bad with money. Define bad with money. Most people diagnosed as bad with money are running financial code installed in environments where the behaviors that look irresponsible now were rational then. Spending everything immediately is rational if the environment taught you that money disappears. Avoiding financial planning is rational if the environment taught you that the future is unpredictable. Overspending on visible consumption is rational if the environment taught you that social proof is your only form of security. The behaviors persist because the code persists. Calling it bad with money blames the person while ignoring the programming. 8 billion people, every single one inside a financial operating system they didn't write. The child born into wealth absorbs a different code than the child born into poverty, but both absorb code. The wealthy child's code might say, money is abundant, spending is safe, financial risk is manageable. The impoverished child's code says the opposite. Neither child chose the programming. Both are running it decades later. A person with a scarcity operating system sitting in a financial literacy seminar is like a person with a corrupted hard drive downloading new software. The software is good. The drive underneath it still shapes how the software runs. Financial stress, the most commonly reported source of anxiety across almost every demographic, is not purely an income problem. If it were, it would disappear at a specific income level. It doesn't. Financial anxiety exists at every tier. The hedge fund manager losing sleep over portfolio risk and the single mother losing sleep over rent are running different numbers through the same emotional architecture. A financial operating system installed in childhood and never audited. The financial pillar sits at the intersection of every other pillar. Money affects physical health because healthcare costs money. Money affects mental health because financial stress compresses cognitive function. Money affects relationships because resource allocation is a relational negotiation. Money affects purpose because the freedom to pursue meaning requires margin. Every pillar touches money, which means financial code. The story about money that was written before you earned a dollar is running interference across your entire system. Growing up in financial scarcity at 594 Driggs Avenue installed a code I didn't write and spent decades running without examining. That code told me money was scarce, survival was the ceiling, and the gap between have and need was permanent. The same environment installed something else, a relationship with resourcefulness that money alone can't buy. When you grow up with nothing, you learn what things actually cost, not in dollars, but in trade-offs. You learn that every dollar is a decision. You learn to extract maximum value from minimum resources. You learn, at a cellular level, that money is not wealth. Money is a tool. Wealth is what you build with it. The scarcity code was restriction. The resourcefulness was capacity. Both came from the same environment. Both run simultaneously. Ozone Park should have been the end. Underwater mortgage, 75% income reduction, children on mattresses, grocery anxiety with director level titles on the resume. By every financial metric, that was failure. Inside that compression, the resourcefulness pattern kept operating. The licenses, the certifications, the training, purchased during the worst financial years of my life, became the foundation of everything that followed. The deliberate downsizing to a one-bedroom apartment was the scarcity code and the resourcefulness pattern reaching a truce. Reduce overhead, that's the scarcity code. Protecting what you have, create margin for growth, that's the resourcefulness pattern. Building what you need, both operating simultaneously. The truce between them produced a financial movement the Ozone Park house never could. Financial compression in one dimension, smaller space, fewer possessions, lower overhead, created movement across every other dimension. Acting training, cross-country relocation, Liz's return to hospitality leadership, the eventual 5-acre property, the book, the methodology, the companies we own today. From mattresses on the floor to here, not because the scarcity code was overcome, because the resourcefulness that grew beside it, in the same soil under the same pressure, found space to operate. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a wealth manager. If you need help with debt, investment strategy, tax planning, retirement, see someone licensed to advise on those things. What I am, someone who ran a financial operating system written at 594 Driggs Avenue for decades before realizing the code was still active. Someone who made director-level salaries and still felt end-of-month scarcity, not because the money wasn't there, but because the programming said it wouldn't be. Someone who slept next to his children on mattresses on the floor and invested in personal growth at the same time, because two codes were running and only one of them was visible. Here's what I leave you with. Think about the first financial lesson you remember. Not the first thing someone taught you about money, the first thing you absorbed about money. The sound in the house when bills arrived. The face your mother made at the grocery checkout. The thing that was never bought that you knew you needed. The conversation that stopped when you entered the room. That's not a memory. That's the source code of your financial operating system. It's still running. And until you go back and audit it, test it against your current financial reality, not the reality of the kitchen where it was installed. Every financial decision you make is being filtered through someone else's experience of money. Your relationship with money was programmed before you ever earned a dollar. That's not the end of the conversation. It's where the real conversation begins. This was one pillar of 8, your financial life. What you earn, what you spend, what you save, what you owe, and the invisible code running beneath every one of those numbers. Financial restriction doesn't stay in your bank account. It compresses every other pillar: physical health, mental clarity, emotional regulation, professional ambition, relational honesty, and purpose. Which is why addressing the code, not just the mechanics, matters. The book, Synovial Space, A Guide to Dynamic Living, maps all 8 dimensions and includes the Financial Edge Expansion Framework and tools for auditing your financial operating system. The free diagnostic at h2pcollective.com maps where you actually are across all 8 pillars. It takes 15 minutes, honest data. Your money story was written before you. Rewriting it starts with reading the original. This has been Pillar Work. I'm Raphael St. James.